Hi, welcome to episode 1 of Renewing the Conversation, a series of interviews where we talk to leading industry professionals and experts about energy and heating, with a focus on the home and what challenges the industry and homeowners face.
Today we welcome Dr. Jan Rosenow, Principal and Director of European Programs at the Regulatory Assistance Project, which is a global team of energy experts. In this episode, we ask Jan about the future of renewable heating, what role hydrogen can play, and his personal experience with an air source heat pump.
Before we get started, we want to say a huge thank you to today's sponsor, the MCS, which define, maintain and improve quality by certifying products and installers so that homeowners can have confidence in the low carbon technology they're investing in. To find out more, head over to www.mcscertified.com.
Don't forget to hit the subscribe button below and please show your support by giving us a thumbs up.
Enjoy the interview. Hi Jan, thank you so much for joining us today. We are very excited to talk to you and get your thoughts on renewables. While your career is incredibly impressive and includes highlights such as speaking at the Houses of Commons and European Parliament and being named one of the top 25 energy influencers, equally as impressive is that you started an environmental group at just 8 years old. Can you tell us what sparked this very young passion for the environment, and then subsequently how you kind of transitioned into renewables?
Sure. Thanks for having me. So I think the inspiration for that really came from my parents at the time, who were very active and were part of the environmental movement in Germany. And they sort of inspired me. They lived in a very nice house with a big garden in the countryside with lots of animals and plants to discover. So I got really interested in that, I think, and then quite quickly realized that it's not everywhere like that. There are a lot of places in the world where the environment is deteriorating. So I felt I wanted to do something about that, and got really passionate about that.
Do you think that that's something that is really needed for future generations, is to kind of encourage that level of interest in the environment at a young age through education and schooling? Because it's really interesting that you say that it was very much your environment that kind of influenced you to then go on to kind of get involved. So do you think that that's something that, for example, in urban environments and in cities, that kids kind of need to be more encouraged and more inspired to kind of get involved in that from a much younger and tender age?
Absolutely. I think that's so important, especially if you've never seen anything outside of the city, which sadly is a reality for some children in this country and in other countries. How can you connect to the environment, to nature? It's all very abstract, isn't it? And when you talk about things like climate change and biodiversity loss, but if you're just in an urban environment, it's much more difficult to relate to that. So I think that's absolutely critical, and certainly for me, I think is made up a large part of my motivation to work in this area and in this field, to sort of protect what we've got. We only have one planet, and we need to make sure that our kids and their kids can live on it and have a good life on it.
And you think that obviously renewables, you feel, play a really important role for the future of us working to protect and to repair some of the climate damage that we've done. So with regards to renewables, where do you see the future of renewables, and how do you feel that is the industry going in the right direction, and where do you feel that we should be at what stage do you feel we should be at?
I got really interested in renewables probably about 20 years ago. I studied environmental sciences in my first degree, and I quickly realized that understanding the problems of what happens in the environment doesn't really help me to formulate the solution. So I then very quickly studied environmental and resource economics, and renewables were a key part of that. And clearly we've made a lot of progress. I mean, that is one of the areas where I think especially the UK has a fairly proud track record. The last decade, I think carbon emissions more than halved in terms of the grid intensity, which is very impressive. And that's largely to do with phasing out coal power plants, and also deploying a lot of offshore wind, but also small-scale renewables such as photovoltaics. So I think that that is certainly a good track record, but we haven't done enough yet. I think in some of the other sectors. So when you look at buildings in particular, but also the transport sector, the amount of renewables that are being used in those sectors is still very, very small. I think it's only less than 5% of buildings in the UK that use renewables for heating. And when you look at the transport sector, the vast majority of fuels being used as sort of petrol and diesel, and that isn't sustainable, of course. So we have a lot more work to do in those sectors. But I think the track record in the power sector shows that we can do this with the right policy environment. Things change very, very quickly and much more rapidly than we ever thought.
What do you think that the main challenges are from a consumer point of view? So with regards to homeowners actually becoming educated on renewables and how they can, incorporate those into their home, and, what their concerns and hesitations are. How do you feel the government needs to support that and kind of meet that challenge?
Well, currently, if you've done this yourself, right? Currently, when you switch to renewable heating technology, you are in most cases getting penalized because your heating costs go up, and that's because the alternatives, fossil fuels are very, very cheap, and if you switch to something like a heat pump, for example, you pay more because there's more policy costs loaded onto electricity bills, which is something that we've done in the past, and that in my view need to correct at some point in the near future. But that is clearly a major hurdle for households, for businesses to switch to renewable heating. That is something that I hope the heated building strategy that we expect in this month even will at least start to signal that will be corrected. But that is a big problem, I think. The underlying economics simply work against people switching to low carbon or zero carbon forms of heating.
Are heat pumps too expensive? Because we've had the schemes like the RHI and the Green Homes Grant almost inflate the cost of heat pumps and the installations. What do you think that the changes that are coming down the track are going to try and address some of those kind of challenges in the industry and issues with regards to like the costs, as you're saying, to homeowners?
If I could just maybe supplement that a little bit further, because we've spoken to quite a number of installers, and they basically said that a lot of the grants have artificially inflated in some instances, especially installation costs, because the heat pumps are often not that expensive, but the installation costs are quite expensive. So I know that the clean heat grant is coming in next year. Do you think that that's going to affect that in any way?
That's a good point. And when you look at how much money was put into the renewable heat incentive, the RHI, only a small fraction of that has been used up. So there was a lot more subsidy available than applications. And clearly that indicates there's sort of a lack of demand, a lack of competition, I think, that flows from that. And then that inflates prices, because if there's a lot of subsidy available that are not being taken up, and there's not a lot of demand, you get inflated prices, which is really concerning. When you look at how much of a cost reduction could be achieved with innovation and scaling up deployment, I've certainly seen claims by people that heat pump costs could be brought down quite quickly by 30 or 40%. Once you sort of get to a mass market, once you get to more competition, and for the reasons you outlined, it's not the manufacturing of the technology, it's the entire supply chain, the installation, and also the different steps involved from manufacturing to installation, where there's always a profit margin that somebody makes, and currently the industry isn't particularly well set up to really bring down the price and make it work as a product for consumers. So I think prices will come down quite significantly. By how much, I think nobody really knows. There have been predictions by Octopus Energy, for example, that they could sell a heat pump for, I think, £5,500 in the UK.
Wow.
Which, of course, compared to currently for an air source heat pump, you'll be paying probably more around 10,000. That would be a very significant reduction. But we don't know yet, exactly how prices will evolve. And I'm not going to make a prediction But I think it's probably fair to say that prices currently are inflated and prices will come down.
Can I just ask, with regards to where the UK stands compared to other European countries? We've had a little bit of feedback from other people that live in other parts of Europe, and they come back to us and say, wow, our installation costs were nowhere near this. Our overall cost of investing as a homeowner were nowhere near what you're paying in the UK. Is that something that the government is aware of, and is that something that you think that will also bring us in line with kind of other countries that have a much more kind of reasonable investment cost to begin with for homeowners?
That is certainly the case, and I've had people respond to me saying that their prices in their countries were a lot lower. And we see that over time, for I think every doubling of cumulative production of heat pumps, you get about a third reduction in price. There's been academic research into this, but that depends, I think, on also where you are in the world. And the UK had a very small number of heat pumps installed in the past, and there simply hasn't been that learning, I think, and there hasn't been that competition and innovation. So I would expect that we see that pretty quickly. Once demand increases, we will see costs come down, as in any other sector. I don't think heat pumps are exceptional. We've seen that with other technologies. Already mentioned offshore wind and photovoltaics, but also battery technology. Prices have come down rapidly also in the UK. So I wouldn't expect that to be any different for heating.
So Jan, what do you think is holding back the installation of heat pumps? I know that the UK government has targeted installing 600,000 heat pumps a year by 2028. We're obviously nowhere near that number at the moment. So what do you think is holding this number back from an installation perspective? Well,
there's several things that I work here, right? One is we already talked about the higher capital cost. So a gas boiler you can buy for 2,000, maybe 3,000 pounds, including the installation. And if the heat pump costs you 10,000 pounds, maybe more, if you go for a ground source heat pump, which is more efficient, you might be looking at certainly more than 15,000 pounds, maybe 20,000 pounds. So clearly, that's already the first barrier. And then the second issue is clearly around the running costs, which I referred to earlier. So if not only are you paying more for the installation, in many cases, you also, especially when you had a gas boiler before, you're also paying more for operating the system. So already, when you look at these two numbers as a customer, why would you switch to a more expensive technology unless you really value the environmental benefits that delivers? That is difficult to see. So I think we need to get the economics right. But I think also finally there needs to be, and not just an incentive to do this, but overall there will need to be some sort of phase out of the sales of new fossil heating technology. Very similar to what we've done with cars, right? Everybody's now accepted that in the next decade, at some point, you will no longer be able to buy a petrol diesel vehicle. I think 2030 is the phase out date for petrol and diesel vehicles, unless they are plug-in hybrid. I think that's 2035 when that will come into effect. But we have a phase out date, and that is driving the market because it signals to people this is not what's going to continue forever. You will have to change your technology decision when you make an investment next time, and people come around to that. And so we need something similar, I think, for that as well, for fossil heating, to signal to people that at some point this is no longer going to be available to them, and they need to switch.
So with the amount of push that we're seeing from the government and from the industry as a whole to go towards more electric powered vehicles, now the heat pumps, or all these things are relying on electricity. And a real big hot topic at the moment that we're seeing in the press that's kind of coming over and over again is electricity tariff and prices and concerns from consumers. Do you think that these are valid concerns from consumers with regards to electricity tariffs, and how can the government step in and kind of help us all transition into all these different technologies that are so reliant on electricity?
No, of course, that is a concern. And I think the recent price rises that we've seen, I think, in wholesale markets that will now feed through to consumers are mainly driven by higher gas prices. Gas is more expensive, and that is driving higher electricity prices at the wholesale level, and that is then being passed on to consumers. So I think that's just important to see that it's not just a story about renewables push and decarbonisation pushing up electricity costs. The latest spikes are primarily driven by higher gas prices, and that is something I think the government is concerned about, and consumer organizations are rightly concerned about how to mitigate that electricity is becoming more expensive. Well, we need to roll out renewables at record speed. I mean, we've done well, but we need to do even better, and we need to go even faster. You can see already an electric vehicle is a lot cheaper to run than a petrol or diesel car. And even though the capital costs up front are still higher, they will come down, and people expect them to be, I think, on par with internal combustion engine vehicles pretty soon. You get a lot of savings over the lifetime of the vehicle already because it's cheaper to run, and that's simply because it's so much more efficient, and that is giving you a financial saving. Even though electricity is a premium product, is more expensive, of course, than just burning petrol and diesel. Denmark, for example, has decided to exempt all electricity used in heat pumps from taxation to the bare minimum level that is required by European law. Wow. And that clearly is one way of incentivizing people to use electricity, and that lowers the running costs and makes it much more affordable and sustainable also financially for them.
Other than the electricity tariff concern, what else do you feel is going to be the biggest challenges from the homeowners perspective? From our experience, I think that our biggest challenges was the installation and the commissioning being done professionally. But thereafter, I think that things like getting home insurance, getting your home insurance to cover your actual machinery that you spent so much money and time and investment putting into it, you want it to be insured, and we kind of have struggled with that. So what are the biggest challenges facing homeowners during this transitional period and during this uptake of homeowner, it becoming far more common for houses to have renewables?
Well, I think there's still a lack of joint of thinking in the supply chain. I mean, and I speak from first-hand experience as well. If you want to sort of have a whole package of measures, you don't just want a heat pump being installed in your garden and connected. There's a whole lot of other things that are going on, right? At the same time, you might want to think about having a hot water tank somewhere. You might want to think about integrating that with your solar panel on your roof. You might want to upgrade efficiency because you're already doing some works to the building. Maybe you want to install underfloor heating. And often you've got to deal with all sorts of different trades, different companies. And at least currently, there are very few offerings where somebody pulls all of that together and delivers you a seamless product and manages it for you. Again, I don't think that needs to be that way. Look at bathrooms and kitchens, which are quite complex as well. You have a lot of different trades involved. It's tailored and bespoke, but we have a mass market for it, and there is an offering. You can actually get a fully project managed kitchen installed. And you can get a fully project managed bathroom installed, but you cannot get that currently, or at least there are very few offerings for a retrofit of your building that involves all of these bits being put together. So I think that is a major hurdle, and that clearly is already something that slows down demand right now, because a lot of people who actually financially could afford the investment and would want to do it, but they simply don't have the trust, I think, that there will be a well-designed specification for the retrofit that they would like.
Yeah, that's a really good point on trust. I think that that's something that we're seeing a lot of is consumers or homeowners really hesitating because there is that lack of trust, there's lack of confidence. And I think that never helps any industry. That really holds an industry back, or in some cases damages an industry, when you've got consumer confidence that is shaken, or it's, I think at the moment when we're now transitioning and pushing forward, now is the time where the industry as a whole really needs to look at the fundamental confidence as consumers and really build that up. And something that was what we were discussing in one of our last interviews was the possibility of an ombudsman, and the industry bringing in an ombudsman to try and as just not the sole solution, but as another kind of bolt on to the industry to help boost that confidence in consumers. What is your opinion and thoughts on that? And do you think that the industry needs that?
Yeah, it's interesting that you bring up this point, and that's something. When you look at other countries, how they have managed to achieve much higher rates of deployment of clean heating technologies. Sweden, for example, had very strong consumer protections in the past, because they recognized, especially I think in the 1980s, when they had a lot of poor installations, poorly trained installers, and a bad reputation essentially for the technologies. They recognized they needed to do something about it, and they set up institutions that would allow you as a customer to essentially complain about the installation you've got, to have some sort of mechanism to get compensated. And the government then put a lot of thought into how do we ensure quality of installation to avoid lots of disputes that had to be dealt with. First of all, better training and better quality, at the same time an ability to get compensated if things went wrong, increased consumer confidence, and increased the quality throughout the supply chain. We know not just from heating, but also other programs in the UK. You could look at things like energy efficiency programs. Solar thermal, I think, is another good example for hot water, where we've seen issues with the quality of installation in the past that could have been avoided and have given the technologies a bad name unnecessarily. And that is so critical, I think, in the next years as we move towards that target of 600,000 heat pumps, and the much tougher targets for net zero to 2050. So it will be absolutely critical, I think, to offer a positive customer journey and a good experience. Because otherwise, this will be exploited by forces who want to slow down this process, and will just use single cases to demonstrate that it's not working, and that we stick with the status quo for just a little bit longer.
One of the things that we heard of recently was projects that were involved in district heating. Have you heard of district heating? Do you know anything about it? We're struggling to kind of find out more about district heating. That sounded really interesting as a concept. And is the UK doing anything with regards to that? And is that something that's more evolved in other European countries?
Yeah, district heating is really interesting. And I think any analysis that looks at how to decarbonize our economy usually identifies a role for district heating somewhere. And especially in dense urban areas. It plays a very important role again in Scandinavia, where a lot of it is currently based still on biomass, but it's being replaced, I think, gradually by using large-scale heat pumps, for example. And then, of course, you also have a very large deployment of district heating in Central and Eastern Europe. We do a lot of work in Poland. There's a lot of district heating, but unfortunately, that's driven mainly by coal. But that could be replaced, and the infrastructure is just a network, right? So the fuels that are being used to generate the heat could be zero carbon, or they could be very carbon intensive. In the UK, district heating plays a very limited role. I think it's way less than 1% of the building stock that's been connected to a district heating network. The progress of deployment is too slow. We looked at this a while back as part of some work I did with the UK Energy Research Centre, and we're behind. We're not on track to deliver sufficient deployment of district heating to meet the climate goals.
Insulation is a big problem in houses in the UK. We've got a wonderful heritage of period properties in the UK, but with that comes the fact that then a lot of them are very poorly insulated, and insulation is a really key component to installing renewables in your home and making it all work efficiently. How do you feel that the government or homeowners or the industry as a whole can tackle insulation and kind of, I think you touched on that earlier, which was such a really interesting concept of having this turnkey solution for your central heating, and maybe going to one company that can come in and offer you lots of different things like your solar and improving your radiators. And do you think that would also be kind of a part of that, looking at the insulation of the home and making sure that was also taking into consideration?
Yeah, absolutely. And when we look at district heating, to come back to this topic, you can actually find that the total cost of deploying a district heating system that runs on renewables decreases significantly if you also have efficient buildings and an efficient end use. If you just look at the fuel supply and you try to kind of find the least cost pathway, that's significantly higher than if you also look at the end use and look at the consumer and look at what you can do with efficiency there. And that holds for the entire economy. If you ignore the demand side, the cost of decarbonization will be significantly higher in any of the sectors. But unfortunately, in the past, we have been too reluctant to do enough about the demand side. And most of the discussions, I think, continue to be about the supply side. All the hype about hydrogen right now is a good example. Energy efficiency is by far the largest resource for decarbonization. And all the studies by the International Energy Agency that have been done over the years always assign the largest and the most important role for decarbonization to energy efficiency. So it's absolutely critical that we get our house in order.
You've touched on hydrogen. I think that when it comes to the UK, I think a lot of homeowners seem to think that gas and heating are synonymous. Hydrogen has been thrown into the equation and people perceive that as being the silver bullet. What is your take on that?
Well, it depends what the hydrogen is being used for. There are clearly some areas where hydrogen, especially green hydrogen, is going to be quite important. And the first area is, of course, where we currently use grey hydrogen or black hydrogen. So that is hydrogen from fossil fuels with no carbon abatement at all, where it's a very carbon-intensive process. For example, fertilizer production uses a lot of hydrogen, and replacing carbon-intensive hydrogen with green hydrogen is a very sensible way of using hydrogen. You could also think of shipping and aviation, where it's going to be difficult to have large enough batteries to really do this effectively. Again, hydrogen could play an important role there. And also there's a discussion, I think, to be had. How do we balance the power system? If we have a lot of renewables, we still need some dispatchable power, where you can turn on and off as needed, and using hydrogen for that would clearly be one of the options that is available. But I think to come back to heating, this is one of the areas alongside cars and small vans and things like that, where all of the independent analyses that have been done are very clear. Hydrogen is an inferior option for decarbonization. It is more expensive, a lot more inefficient than electrification in particular. And what it will lead to is significantly higher heating costs for people who use hydrogen. We have cost projections from different organizations, but they all agree that hydrogen is going to be multiple times more expensive than gas that is currently being used in the UK. And therefore, my view is that it's not only an inefficient use of a scarce resource. We don't have a lot of low carbon hydrogen right now, but it also is not an economic choice, and it would drive up heating costs for everybody. And that is not something that would be wise to pursue. However, one small caveat, I think there is certainly a complementary role for hydrogen to be explored in heating. You may consider, for example, a district heating network where you have some hydrogen use for a CHP, a combined heat and power plant, that you connect to it. You may use it in a hybrid system where you have already a hydrogen network because there's an industrial cluster. So there might be some areas where hydrogen makes sense also in heating, but it's not a bulk solution. It's not going to supply the fuel for most heating systems in the UK anytime soon.
So we've got a long way to go, and it sounds like the UK has got an awful lot of lessons that it needs to start learning and needs to start learning really rapidly. What are the things that you are feeling positive about, hopeful about, and excited about in the renewable space and also for homeowners?
Well, I think what is exciting is that we can really see an end of coal now in the UK. I think 2024, the last coal power plant will be shut down. That would have been unthinkable in 2006 when I first started working in the UK on climate issues. Coal was still a very, very important form of generation, and carbon emissions of electricity were very significant and were very high. So we can see an end of that. We also see significant increase in renewables being deployed to make electricity going forward. So I think that's exciting to see electricity becoming a lot cleaner than the alternatives, using gas, using petrol and diesel. We also see all the innovation that's happening. Once you get to scale, electric vehicles, again, I think are a great example. 10 years ago, really, electric vehicles were in a complete niche market, limited range, very expensive. But suddenly you see that has changed, and you can really see that there's no way back now. This is just going to happen. So I'm excited about seeing similar things happening, especially in heating, which is such a hard to decarbonize sector for all the reasons we discussed. There's so many barriers. The supply chain isn't quite ready yet for it. But I think once it's clear that this is going to happen, we will see some amazing innovation and things that we don't even anticipate today. Where we have no idea what's coming. But I believe with the right political signal, we will actually get that, and we will see a lot of innovation. And when we look back 10 years ago, in 10 years, we will find a lot of things have happened that nobody would have predicted. So I'm very optimistic about that. But it needs leadership. It's not going to happen by itself, especially in the run up to COP26 in Glasgow. It'll be important, I think, to show leadership. And the UK government still has that opportunity. There's still further policy announcements coming. So I really do hope that it's more than just outlining some ambitious targets, but showing some leadership on the actual policy.
We obviously switched to an air source heat pump a few years ago. We know that you switched to one in 2019. You removed your gas boiler. How have you found your air source heat pump performing in your property?
Well, it's been 2 years now. So we had 2 winters. And so far, no issues at all. I mean, no repairs, no problems with it at all. And the house is very nice and comfortable. What I would say is that it certainly is a change from a gas boiler, which we had before, where usually we would just flick a switch in the morning, and then after 20 minutes or so, the house would be sort of comfortable. And then you turn it off in the evening again. With a heat pump, you actually just leave the technology do its thing, and it takes some getting used to, especially at the beginning when you're not quite sure what temperature do you want and when. But once you've put the settings right, actually it's quite nice not having to think about it. It's a much more passive technology, I found, than a gas boiler.
Did you improve any insulation in your home when you went through that process, or upscale any of your radiators or anything?
Yes, we did. I mean, we put in new windows in a few rooms and upgraded insulation in parts of the house. There's still more work to be done, but some of this is kind of related to other building works we've done, and so we do it in a staged fashion rather than everything at once for that reason. And we've also had to upgrade some of the radiators, but they were 40 years old or even older and very inefficient, clogged up. And even with a gas boiler, we couldn't heat our front room in the winter to a decent temperature when it dropped below zero, because it was simply not running at the right temperature. It was too small, too inefficient, and now the front room is the warmest room in the house.
So you said that the heating the house is comfortable. Have you found it comparable to the gas boiler from a heating perspective and from a running cost perspective?
It's certainly more comfortable overall, but that's not just because of the heat pump. It's also because of the efficiency improvements. So just having the heat pump wouldn't make us more comfortable. If we just left everything the way it was, it would be just as uncomfortable as it was before, when we had the gas boiler. So we would have done the energy efficiency upgrades anyway at some point, and we have started doing some of them before we got the heat pump. But the comfort levels have certainly gone up. It's a lot warmer and it's a lot more constant. I think the temperature it's not sort of getting really cold in the night and then really nice and warm once you switch on the boiler. It's much more constant temperature all year round. We had significantly lower running costs at the beginning because we switched to a time-varying tariff. But in more recent months, with electricity prices going up, again, coming back to higher gas prices and that leading to a higher electricity prices, we see our electricity costs rising, and that benefit is no longer as profound. So clearly that is something I'm watching quite carefully. But the first year and a half or so, we had lower running costs compared to the gas boiler, which I was surprised by, but was very happy about, of course. But right now, I think with prices going up, that could change, and I'm concerned about that.
Is there any advice, now that you are an air source heat pump consumer, is there any advice that you could impart on people that are considering putting an air source heat pump in?
Well, what I would say is, if you live in a really inefficient building and you have no insulation at all, you've got single glazing, solid walls, and you think about what to do with your heating system, I think that's where you should start, really. Regardless of what fuel you're using, whether you stick with gas or you switch to some other technologies, you should sort out the very basic energy efficiency properties of your home. Otherwise, it's going to be difficult to be comfortable in any case. So I would certainly not advise somebody who has no insulation and single glazing to install a heat pump. I would first advise them to at least look at things like loft insulation and maybe changing the windows to at least double glazing. But if you have a fairly well insulated home and you're thinking about replacing your heating system, get a well-designed heat pump from a very well-respected installer. Do some research on that and make sure they design it properly for you. You will be comfortable. That is not the issue. I think on the running cost side, there are now some tariffs for people with heat pumps. I know Good Energy launched a specific heat pump tariff lately. Octopus Energy has a time of use tariff that can be used, and there are other companies out there. So certainly look into that and get some advice on whether it'll be possible to take advantage of that. Those would probably be the two things. You sort out the energy efficiency, make sure you have a good tariff, three things, and get a really good high quality install. Otherwise, as with any other technology, if the installation is poor, you will have a poor experience, and that can be completely avoided.
Just talking about the installation and with regards to, we touched on the lack of the Ombudsman in the industry, but there is the MCS. Do you think that the MCS are a valuable tool to at least give homeowners a little bit of assurance that the installation is being done correctly?
Absolutely. I've recommended MCS, but also UGen as platforms where you can find installers. People say, who should I trust? Where should I go? Those are two platforms you can use to identify qualified installers, and you can see reviews and you can see their reputation. So that is quite useful. And then, of course, MCS also provides a degree of quality control. You have to undergo certain training, you need to fulfill certain criteria. So we use an MCS accredited installer as an insurance policy to make sure you don't get somebody who doesn't really know what he or she's doing, and then you get a poor installation. So I would certainly advise people to take advantage of both MCS and UGen.
So thank you so much, Jan, for taking the time out to be with us today. I think that we've really covered a really nice, diverse amount of topics, and hopefully our audience has enjoyed this interview. I agree with you. I hope that we start to see some really exciting policy come out towards the end of this year, and that we really start to see the industry push forward. And I agree. I think that the next 10 years, there are going to be some really big changes. So it is an exciting time to be in renewables. It's a very exciting time. An exciting time for homeowners as well, to start to see new technologies open up to them and new options. So thank you so much for your time, Jan. It's been an absolute pleasure.
It's been amazing, Jan. Thank you so much for your time.
Thanks so much.
Thanks for having me.